Africa's history is vast, complex, and rich, spanning millions of years. From the dawn of humanity to the present day, it has shaped and been shaped by many forces: geographical, cultural, political, and social. This journey traces key moments in the history of Africa, capturing some of the most significant events, leaders, and developments. Early Africa, the cradle of humankind. Long before the first civilizations arose, Africa was home to the earliest ancestors of modern humans. Fossils found in places like the Omo Valley in Ethiopia suggest that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa around 200,000 years ago. The continent holds the key to the story of human evolution, with ancient hominids, such as Australopithecus, leaving traces of their existence in Africa millions of years ago. Africa's early human history is also intertwined with the development of tools, art, and language. The earliest evidence of human innovation is found in places like Blombo's Cave in South Africa, where ancient people crafted sophisticated tools and created some of the oldest known cave art, symbolizing early forms of communication and culture. Ancient civilizations, Egypt and beyond. By 3100 BCE, one of the world's first great civilizations emerged along the banks of the Nile River, ancient Egypt. It is here that monumental achievements in architecture, medicine, mathematics, and governance were realized. The Egyptians built the pyramids, which still stand as a testament to their engineering ingenuity, and created a centralized government under the rule of pharaohs, with a complex religion and a written language, hieroglyphics. To the south of Egypt, the kingdom of Kush flourished in modern-day Sudan. The Kushites were highly influential, often acting as both adversaries and allies to the Egyptians. At times, the Kushites even ruled Egypt as pharaohs, such as during the 25th dynasty, known for its military prowess and cultural exchange between the two regions. Beyond Egypt and Kush, other early African civilizations began to rise. In the Horn of Africa, the kingdom of Aksum, modern-day Ethiopia, emerged around 100 CE. Aksum became one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in the ancient world, known for its extensive trade networks and early adoption of Christianity in the 4th century CE. The Great African Empires. As time passed, powerful African empires began to dominate the landscape, each one contributing to the development of the continent's culture and economy. In West Africa, the Ghana Empire flourished from around the 6th to 13th centuries. Ghana was not located in the modern country of Ghana, but in an area that spans parts of Mali and Mauritania. This empire controlled much of the trans-Saharan gold trade and became wealthy from the commerce that flowed through its borders. However, by the 12th century, it began to decline due to invasions and internal strife. The Mali Empire, which emerged in the 13th century, would become one of the wealthiest and most powerful states in Africa. Under the leadership of Mansa Musa, who reigned from 1312 to 1337, Mali reached the height of its prosperity. Mansa Musa's famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 was a display of Mali's wealth, as he brought a caravan that included thousands of soldiers, servants, and camels laden with gold. His influence spread far beyond West Africa, with cities like Timbuktu becoming centers of learning, culture, and Islamic scholarship. The Songhai Empire succeeded Mali as the dominant power in West Africa in the 15th and 16th centuries. At its peak, Songhai was one of the largest empires in history, known for its military strength and control over crucial trade routes in gold, salt, and slaves. The empire eventually fell to Moroccan invaders in 1591, marking the decline of one of Africa's great empires. Meanwhile, to the east, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, with its impressive Great Zimbabwe ruins, stood as a symbol of the region's power and influence in the 11th to 15th centuries. The kingdom controlled trade routes that extended into the interior of Africa and along the coast, trading gold and ivory with Swahili traders on the Indian Ocean. The impact of the transatlantic slave trade. By the 15th century, European nations began their exploration of Africa, first driven by trade and later by the pursuit of colonization. One of the most tragic consequences of this exploration was the transatlantic slave trade, which saw millions of Africans forcibly taken from their homeland to the Americas between the 16th and 19th centuries. The impact of the slave trade on Africa was devastating. Whole populations were uprooted, and the economies of many regions were disrupted. African societies were fragmented as a result of the internal and external conflicts that arose over slave trading. Kingdoms like Dahomey and the Oyo Empire became deeply involved in the trade, often waging wars to capture people to sell to European traders. At the same time, African slaves in the Americas played a key role in shaping the culture, economy, and history of the New World. The legacy of the transatlantic slave trade is still felt today in the African diaspora and the ongoing struggles for racial equality. #, the age of European colonization. The 19th century brought about the scramble for Africa, where European powers divided the continent among themselves without regard for existing ethnic, cultural, or political boundaries. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 set the rules for the partitioning of Africa, and by the early 20th century, most of the continent was under European colonial control. Colonialism brought immense suffering to Africa. The indigenous populations were often exploited, forced into labor, and subjected to harsh policies that stripped them of their rights and resources. Resistance to colonial rule was widespread, from the Zulu resistance to British rule in South Africa to the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. #, the struggle for independence. The mid-20th century witnessed the rise of African nationalism, with leaders advocating for independence from European powers. World War II played a significant role in accelerating the process of decolonization, as the war weakened European powers and emboldened independence movements in Africa. In 1957, Ghana became the first African country to gain independence under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, and other nations quickly followed suit. The winds of change swept across the continent, and by the 1960s, dozens of African countries had gained their independence. These new nations, however, often face challenges such as ethnic conflict, political instability, and the need to rebuild after decades of exploitation. #, post-independence Africa, struggles and triumphs. The post-independence era was marked by both successes and struggles. While many African nations enjoyed initial periods of optimism, the aftermath of colonialism and the challenges of nation-building led to instability in several countries. Military coups, dictatorship, and civil wars were common in many regions. Despite these challenges, the 20th century also saw the rise of key figures such as Nelson Mandela, who led South Africa's struggle against apartheid, a brutal system of racial segregation and oppression. After years of imprisonment and resistance, Mandela was released in 1990 and later became South Africa's first black president in 1994, heralding the end of apartheid. Africa also saw periods of economic growth in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, with countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa emerging as economic powerhouses. However, many nations continue to grapple with poverty, political corruption, and the legacies of colonization and slavery. #, contemporary Africa. Today, Africa is a continent of great diversity, rich cultural traditions, and rapid development. While some regions continue to face challenges related to poverty, conflict, and disease, many African nations are making strides in areas like education, technology, and governance. Pan-Africanism, the idea of unity among African nations, remains a powerful force, and organizations like the African Union, AU, work toward fostering cooperation and resolving conflicts. African countries are also playing an increasingly important role in global affairs, from business and trade to climate change and peacekeeping. Africa's story is one of resilience, innovation, and transformation. The continent's journey from the dawn of humanity to the present day reflects both its struggles and triumphs, shaping not only its own history, but also the course of world history.